bought
What
from
do you
where?
think about the fiscal dictatorship we're in? Because there's a law that you can't buy anything over $1,000 right now. Like it has to go through a bank, and the banks have to give all of their information to the government.
The floor, the ceiling was increased. It's more than $1,000 now. But yes, I get the principle. It's stupid, but also it's unenforceable. I mean, how are you gonna? I mean, yeah, sure. I guess when you're buying cars or
Television, refrigerators, furniture.
yeah, that's the thing with those. It's I mean, do you think the big chain stores who sell expensive TVs? Do you think they give a shit that?
Yeah. When I went to Altex, like they said, like, okay, you're buying a TV, you have to pay with credit.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, I wouldn't buy from there. There you go.
I mean, yeah, I suppose, but like at one point, like if you want to buy something, like let's say a refrigerator with some specs, like one that doesn't consume too much, there's only so many stores that sell. Because at one point you're just going to read.
Last time when I hit this issue when the ceiling was much lower, I just said, look, you either take cash or I'm not buying. And they're like, what if you just give me some money today and some money tomorrow in the eyes of the law? And they just basically put in two separate receipts. There you go, problem solved. Because it's very difficult for the state to prove that that was one single transaction, and well, it's perfectly possible for the same person to buy to buy something twice in 2 days in a row from the same store. I mean, it's not. It's very difficult. I guess it would probably trigger some red flags
Well, yeah, like okay.
if it were 35 transactions.
There's people like us that are, concerned about privacy and these things, but like most people don't care.
It's not just privacy; it's also the issue that I don't trust the banks.
No, but think about it this way: like the government now knows exactly where you're going on holiday. They know exactly what you bought. They know exactly what you do. And despite all of this, there's still corruption. Like, despite all of these measures that limit your privacy in exchange for better security, there's still corruption just like ever before, and there's still...
And there will always be, because corruption, being one negative externality of human nature, creates its own free market, and it will always find a way. Always find a way. Because again,
so if you want to ruin corruption, you'd have to socialize it, like have like corruption down in a controlled market environment, and then it would be like less effective.
Maybe
you destroy the free market aspect of corruption.
I guess what would limit corruption is, of course, limiting the power of the government, because it's no longer any point to try to accumulate as much power and influence as possible, because the government, fine, now you own all of the government, and then you figure out that the government can't do anything. So if the government is small, then the amount of corruption will be smaller. There will still be corruption, but a lot
and less intrusive into your life. Because if the government is intrusive into your life, when it's corrupt, then the corruption sinks into your life.
Yes. And so that's one aspect. And the second aspect, we have to learn that some corruption is just inevitable. Because at least in our country, there's this hysteria about anything is corruption.
Corruption kills.
Corruption kills. Well, yeah, sometimes it does actually, but more importantly, we think of our country every time we look at these international statistics, which they actually measure the perception of corruption instead of how corrupt the country is, and we always come out pretty low because we actually perceive our country as being more corrupt than it actually is.
And it also allows free speech. I mean, if you look at a country like Germany, where all the newspapers are agitating...
There is no free speech in Germany, let's be clear about that. And in Germany, their Chancellor, Gerhard Schröder, was just running away with two huge bags full of Deutschmarks, and you could see there is footage of that right in front of the Reichstag, which is the parliament building. Nothing happened. The guy is now some vice CEO at Gazprom and whatnot. Nothing happened to him. Like meanwhile, one of our prime ministers went to jail for a lot less than that.
Yeah, like if a country controls the information, then people are not going to perceive corruption. If a country allows free speech, then people... It's a perfect example.
You get worse in the table the more you talk about your corruption.
Yeah, like it's kind of interesting when communism was. They wouldn't allow crimes like rapes, murders to be on
discussed
television.
About, right.
My grandmother would sleep with her door open because she would look at television. There's no crime. We live in a golden age. When communism fell, all of a sudden there was like this very edgy publication that kids weren't allowed to read, Gazeta Poliției, Police Gazette. and it would only talk about the bed sheet and the morgue. It's like what rapes happened, what murders happened. Like 4 guys went into this old man's home. They did things to him. All of a sudden, my grandmother would lock her door, and she would even barricade it. She had like this knitting machine, this thing. Put it in front of the doors. What's funny is that there was more crime under communism
than in post-communism.
But it was the
perception was different
because the information was controlled.
That's why I laugh at the parents who practice helicopter parenting with their kids today. Oh, but it's unsafe. What do you mean they should ride the subway or the trolley bus or whatever from one end of the city? It's so unsafe, man. And I'm like, did you do that in the 80s when you were a kid? Yeah, well, that was unsafe and that was stupid. That was stupid. Compared to the 80s, now it's the golden age. Yeah, sure, there is crime and there's always
going to be crime. Yeah, but you can't live your life just it's locked up in your house, afraid of going out.
Oh, of course you can. Stay indoors, save lives, save the NHS.
That is absolutely
there you go. Of course you can. By 2050, it's going to be the 384th wave of the pandemic.
How long do you think people will put up with it, though?
Well, it depends on the country. In some countries, they haven't been putting up with it since July last year. In other countries, they still do put up. It depends on the country. It really does depend on the country.
I heard in Berlin there were uprisings.
Oh, they were all the way since September last year. And especially it was not necessarily against the restrictions, but against a particular piece of legislation called the Infektionsschutzgesetz, which Communicable Diseases Act, which included some very weird totalitarian-ish type of provisions that kind of reminded the Berliners of a very recently ended era, and they're like, "Das ist kind of haram," right?
But even the German was used to getting authoritarian from the government is like, okay, that's a little bit too much.
That's a little bit too much, even by German standards, right? Which again, it depends on which German standards, on which decades.
East or west.
And East or West, right? It was mostly the Easterners at first, and then everyone else. But in Serbia, they just burned down the government in July last year,
really?
And because the president wanted to put them back under lockdown, and because the science, whatever, and so the Serbian people came out and they had a very vigorous scientific debate with the president. They used
But they didn't do hate speech.
I don't know.
Well, no, like the problem wasn't what they were saying. The problem is that they burned down the thing. So,
well,
I mean, they didn't commit any acts of hate speech.
There you go. So therefore, the debate was fruitful. But the scientific debate used several weapons, several Molotov cocktails, and and they just went into the president's office, and that's like, shall we continue the debate? And the president be like,
France is reinstating it.
Yeah, but not nationally, only in several hotspots and what I think it was like 16 districts and whatever. I think it's stupid because they obviously don't work. I mean, at the very least, if they were working, I could say, well, I guess, whatever, maybe, but they obviously don't work.
Mm-hmm. People don't follow them, that's the problem.
But in many areas they did, and they still don't work. That's the thing. Or if they do, the trade-off is too
terrible, yeah.
The economic cost of it. Yeah, sure, you may be saving 100 lives. Yeah, but you might be killing 1,000 of the consequences.
Rates,
not just suicide rates, but untreated diseases.
I know a teacher from the medicine school. She had a heart issue, didn't want to go because the media was scaring her. It's like, how many patients at the hospital? So she didn't want to go. She died of a heart attack because she didn't go to the hospital.
Media terrorism,
yeah.
And unfortunately, and this again depends on the country. In Latin countries, except France, it was treated like the huge apocalypse. You think our media was bad? Try reading the Italian media.
Really? Well, yeah, but Italy had it worse. I mean, a lot of elderly there.
Yeah, sure, but the level of exaggeration was also a lot worse, right? In France, at least, dissident voices were permitted for the most part. Yeah, sure, criticized, but at least they were permitted. If you look at the Swedish media, on the other hand, they were like, well, yeah, that's kind of terrible, but this one isn't, and let's try to be adults about it.
The Swedish surprise.
Yes, the Swedish surprise, and even in Norway went full panic at the government, but the press was like, well, let's see, let's work what our neighbors are doing. Maybe it's not that bad.
Okay, more cool-headed.
Yeah. Germany also kind of like Italy. full panic card, stay indoors, this is terrible. So, but then again, if you look inside Germany, Bundesland by Bundesland, in some states the local press was more like Sweden, in some others it was more like Italy.
The local press is not as centralized.
Well, here the same thing. I mean, Ziarul de Iași is very corona skeptic. Right, whereas the national press is very full panic card, stay indoors, save lives. Right. The Minister of Propaganda, as I like to call it. Because he is, I mean, that guy has been a shill for the current power since 1990. There's not a single government from 1990 until present day that CTP didn't like. Because he's the Minister of Propaganda. He will just shill for the current government.
Yeah, he shilled for Băsescu. Did he shill for PSD?
Of course.
Really?
In 1991, after the miners' strike destroyed the civic life in Bucharest, his editorial was like... his editorial was like, we need the silence, which was exactly the slogan of the PDSR.
Oh my God.
Right. He shielded for every single government. Because that's...
So if our would become the government next...
He would shield for ours, for sure. For sure.
Jesus.
Actually, if you look further behind in 2002, 2003, when PSD was somewhat allied with the Greater Romania Party, and there were a lot of based and red pill talking points coming from the government, CTP would shield for those. Not a problem. Because again, he's the Minister of Propaganda. CTP is a journalist, propagandist. A very old propagandist, actually. And he's been doing that before. He shielded for the commies as well.
Yeah.
Not a problem.
Yeah, people forget, like they don't have the memory. But...
The electorate has short memories, and this is true everywhere. Everywhere. I mean, the American electorate forgot about Obama's cages, and now you have Joe Biden's cages, and none of those are a problem. But Trump had like half of the cages, but those were a huge problem.
Who's he shilling for now? Like the National Liberals, or because now there's a coalition in the government? Like,
well, he shills for the entire coalition because again because he is the Minister of Propaganda, and a Minister of Propaganda is a cabinet position. therefore,
so like other journalists take from him and.
Not anymore. That's one of the things that frustrates him quite a lot. In the past, his opinion would dictate at least a quarter of the media narrative. Nowadays, a lot of people are like, pops, go raise your nephews or something.
Yeah, it's also like the way he presents it. He's always angry and he's like, it is, Jesus, it's not very presentable.
Chill,
it's not
man.
very PR. Yeah, it's, maybe that would have been in communism. Like you see the angry, like the passion, the ethos.
And not just in communism, People liked for decades, even after communism, they liked to see passionate discussion. Nowadays,
it's reading from the prompter.
It's a little bit. But then again, this whole Corona situation has a lot of panic cards, and legit passionate people of all sides have crawled out of the woodwork. And now there's just too much hysteria, and now CTP's hysteria is no longer that special.
Yes.
So therefore, he's now a normie.
Too much supply, very little demand.
Yeah. Well, there is still high demand for hysteria, but the supply is just went into full overdrive.